Welcome to Out of Bounds. I'm Kieran Francis, and joining me is Aidan Cellini to discuss that amazing preliminary final with the Swans winning by 1 point, and they're through to the grand final. What a game! Where do we start, Aidan?
Oh, geez, it was just a game for the ages, to be honest. They say preliminary finals are some of the best games of the season, and this one definitely didn't disappoint. Obviously, the Swans did get home in an epic thriller, and the Pies came home hard after trailing by I think 5 goals. So it's just, what a game.
Well, the Swans managed to hold on. Obviously, they were in control for most of the game, and then it was an amazing Collingwood fight. But let's talk about the latter stages of the game.
Yeah, I mean, Collingwood, like all year, reflected by the 11-win streak under new coach Craig McRae, just seem to have this never say die attitude. They constantly give themselves into positions to actually win the game of football. I mean, you saw it in round 23, they trailed Carlton by 23 points to, unfortunately for them, win by 1 point and actually steal fourth spot on the AFL heading into the finals. But unfortunately for this time, for the Magpie Army, they just couldn't get over the line this time.
Yeah, well, it was an incredible finish. There was, it looked like Collingwood over top. There was controversial decisions. There was crucial marks. We should talk about the controversial decision. Now, it obviously happened with maybe about 6-7 minutes to go, but when the margin is obviously one behind, it's definitely a crucial decision. What did you make of when Tom Papley's goal? It appeared to be hands in the back, and it also appeared that he didn't mark the football either. How did you see it?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the calls just go your way, sometimes it doesn't. By the letter of the law, you probably have to think that Papley did probably push Darcy Moore in the back and probably should have been awarded the free kick. I guess umpires do tend to kind of put their whistle away, especially in big games and big finals. And obviously, with Collingwood storming home and really pushing their point to kind of snatch that lead in the dying moments, umpires will probably just allow the players to play it out. In terms of if the ball actually hit the ground or not, maybe the umpire kind of maybe had a bad angle and couldn't really see it. I mean, on the slow replay, as the viewers and audience saw on the TV, probably could see the ball maybe touch the ground just before Papley got his hands under it. But I mean, it's a hard game to umpire at the best of times, let alone at the death of a prelim final.
I just want to bring up the point you just made. We don't want to focus on the decision too much because it was the Swans play some against football too. But the fact that the umpires do kind of put their whistle away in big games, I'm not really sure it's the best thing to do it. It sort of doesn't mean that there's inconsistent umpiring throughout the game and everything. And do you think that there should be more consistency later on in games? Because you're right. Generally, late on, we see the umpires letting it flow, and these kind of situations do pop up when possibly blatant free kicks and decisions aren't made because the umpires are putting their whistle away.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I love the fact that if umpires do put their whistle away and just allow the players to contest, they've got a job to do, 22 players out in the field for either side. Just let them contest and do what they're, trained to do for all the preseason and throughout the year. Let them do what they need to do. Obviously, sometimes when the free kick is there, kind of, step in and obviously adjudicate the game accordingly. But, it is, as I said, it's a hard job at the best of times. And sometimes some umpires say it a little bit differently to the others.
Well, Sydney got the job done in the end. It was a real tight finish. That they basically almost stopped in the last quarter. Let's talk about the good parts of their performance. They were very suffocating in the first 3 quarters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, similar to their round 22 win against Collingwood at the SCG, funnily enough, they just seem to kind of hinder Collingwood's erratic and free-flowing ball movement, allowing them kind of to intercept the ball around halfback with the McCartan brothers, Dane Rampy, Jake Lloyd, and Nick Blakey of the like to really come across and intercept that ball and then kind of play this methodical approach where they just chip the ball up to the wing and almost just forward of centre and then launch the ball deep inside their 50. So if Franklin or Sam Reid couldn't actually mark the ball, it usually trickles over the boundary line and they reset. Sydney Swans are a fantastic contested ball team. Callum Mills, obviously Chad Warner emerging. James Rowland was outstanding today, although his stats may not necessarily was one of the better players. I think he was really good. Their ability to win the contested ball and win the contest, and even if they don't win it, at least halve the contest and get a reset and allow Tom Hickey and the midfielders to get to work. So I think, yeah, the Swans were just outstanding, obviously, in that first 2.5 quarters, maybe in the first 3 quarters. But, yeah, I mean, it's going to be sort of a thrilling contest next weekend.
It was interesting early in the game because Sydney jumped out to 4 goals to nothing. But if you had a look at the stats, it was even inside 50s. It was even disposals. The Pies actually had the clearance advantage by 2 when it was, I think it was 26-0 at one point. And it was basically because the the Swans were using the ball so well going side 50, and then they were basically defending and, as we said, suffocating the Pies so well the other way. That 20-point margin was what held pretty much consistently throughout the games. It was almost as if the game was even, I guess, through the first after the initial burst by the Swans. And then obviously Collingwood came back hard in the last quarter. What do you think contributed to Collingwood's slow start? Do you think it was a bit of stage fright?
Yeah, I mean, as you can probably understand that there's a lot of youth in that Collingwood lineup. Obviously, there is experienced players such as Scott Pendlebury, still Sidebottom, even Darcy Moore, who probably actually hasn't played a lot of finals given his injuries over the last few years, but he's played in a few big games. But then you got the likes of Nick Dacus, who's obviously, 2022 rising star in his first season. Isaac Quainer still kind of coming into his own, but still playing really good football. And a lot of other youths like Trent Bianco, Bo McCreary, Pat Lipinski might not have even played a lot of finals in his time at the Western Bulldogs before crossing over to the Collingwood. So the big stage, SCG, obviously a packed house. Sydney came out firing. Hit the contest quite hard. They set the tone quite early, obviously jumping out to a 4-goal lead early in the first quarter, and they really set the tone. I think Collingwood, really had to adjust quite quickly, which I'll say fortunately they did eventually, but maybe it was too little too late in the end.
Yeah, just want to talk about some of the young Pies youngsters. We've seen Ash Johnson play some magnificent football this year, but he looked to really struggle in a prelim final, which is no slight on him because he's only played 7 or 8 games in his career, and he's going to be a really good player. And also players like Murphy struggled as well. Bianco, these players will be a lot better for it. You feel as if even though Sydney are less experienced games wise, that they are the more efficient and the more hardened team in their organisation. And then Collingwood have sort of got to this stage by basically taking on the game and being attacking and stuff. And when it comes to the crunch in the organisation, it was kind of lucky. But got a few comments in. We've got a comment from Bally Owen saying Collingwood were robbed and also that the umpires were atrocious. How did you feel the umpiring was throughout the game?
Look, I said it before. It's one of probably the hardest games to adjudicate. Obviously, there's subjectivity across the board. So one umpire will say it one way, one umpire might say it the other way. So, there'll be some calls where you look at and you watch the replay and you think, gee, they really missed something there, or they probably shouldn't have called that and allowed the players to play on. I'm a big believer in that, although the umpires are there to adjudicate free kicks, whether they're warranted or not, it's really up to the 22 players or 23 players, given the fact there's a couple of subs tonight, to really actually put forth their best efforts and actually drag the teams across the side. Again, I feel like you can nitpick a lot of umpiring calls over the course of the season or the course of the games and really kind of try to find holes in it. But again, they're doing their job the best they can. And I feel like, if the players, Collingwood, allowed that, 26-point deficit early in the piece, which unfortunately they probably just couldn't claw back and actually didn't end up getting in the lead at all for the entirety of the game. So, again, you can sit here and nitpick about the umpires and whatnot, but I feel like it's more up to the actual players and the coaching staff.
Do you feel as if Jack Ginnivan gets a bit of a rough run? There was a decision, a 50-metre penalty given against him at a crucial time where it was probably a bit stiff. I noticed that when he was manning the mark, he was actually kind of gobbing off the umpire, like not that instance, but in previous instances about where to stand and everything. And I don't want to suggest that it was kind of like a bit of a punishment for him, but it was almost like, he kind of got right on the mark and the umpire saw that he went over, even though he didn't. And do you feel as if he does cop a bit of a raw deal? We did see him actually play for a free kick early in terms of when he raised the arm up and he won it. How do you think that situation played out?
Well, I have to say it's almost a little bit of irony. He drew so many free kicks early in the season, and then the umpires had to adjust because of the way he was playing the football. I think in that instance, that 50-metre penalty was very stiff. I saw not long after Lance Franklin kind of did something quite similar. I think it was maybe early in the last quarter and got told to come back up until the 9. I think Jack Ginnivan, I don't know, maybe the umpire thought he was kind of mouthing off or just ran up to the mark a little bit too close. I thought he just wasn't given enough time to kind of come off the mark. He actually, funnily enough, when the replay actually showed him going up to the mark, he actually was right on the spot, if not maybe half a metre back when Dane Rentby actually marked the ball. But I think the umpires and commentators were kind of saying that he just kind of crept into that 9-metre zone by kind of like in toward the goal square, which obviously players are told to have to come back into that least point. So maybe, it's a 50-50 call. I think he probably should have given a little bit of leeway of, given a big crowd probably couldn't hear. But it just felt like he kind of got penalised straight away.
Now, that 50 was obviously unlucky, but there was actually quite a few ill-disciplined moments from Collingwood throughout the game. We saw Braden Maynard hit someone off the ball and give away a 50, which ended up with a Sam Reid goal. And we also saw John Noble involved in a 50. Do you feel as if the occasion was just like particularly early on in the game, was just a bit much for Collingwood?
Yeah, I think so. I think they just got overawed by, obviously, a preliminary final, packed house SCG, Sydney at 8 in a row, now made it 9. It was a big contest, big opportunity to really kind of stamp their authority and kind of obviously get into the grand final. That's obviously what both teams were playing for. So I feel like, they just didn't settle as well as Sydney obviously did, especially in that first half. And it really showed, obviously, undisciplined. I think it was 350 metres for the day against Collingwood. Just things that probably didn't need to happen, and a lot of soft free kicks potentially off the ball, like that Maynard, bump off on Justin McInerney. It probably just was unnecessary because the ball was trickling out of bounds. So I think there's a few little moments where Collingwood would love to have back. That's what they say. It is football.
Get your questions in, guys. We'll get to them, answer them. So with the midfield battle, there was plenty of different matchups throughout the game. Players rotating around. How did you see that?
Well, for starters, I loved Luke Parker's selfless role. I mean, obviously, John Longmire kind of gave him the role to kind of negate Jordan De Goey. Jordan De Goey has been the highest rated player in the first 2 weeks of the finals, and that is obviously reflected in him leading the Gary Ayres up until the end of the second week of the finals. So Luke Parker took on that selfless role. Obviously, he's a contested ball. He's usually the first one into the packs and dishing it out to his teammates. But this time he kind of took not necessarily a backward seat, but kind of went to De Goey and made sure he kind of curbed his influence. Because once De Goey gets out of that contest and running with the ball forward into the forward 50 or the front half for Collingwood, he's really dangerous. And he's usually, if not finding a target, he's usually setting up a goal or shot on goal. So, Luke Parker was excellent tonight. I thought James Rowbottom, although, as I said earlier in the piece, that, his stats don't necessarily reflect his influence, his ability to not only win the ball, but when he didn't, just halve the contest, get a little hand in there to prevent Jack Chris from breaking away from the contest, or Scott Penderfield getting that clean handball out to Isaac Quano running through from the halfback, or Jack Chris or Jordan De Goey. He really kind of just was kind of in the way, almost like a roadblock in that Sydney midfield. And I mean, Callum Mills, again, also co-captain of the Swans, he just keeps leading from the front every week. And, I would love to play knowing he was my captain, and obviously he led from the front again tonight.
And on the Collingwood side, we saw Scott Pendlebury start off on fire with 10 disposals, which was kind of strange because obviously Collingwood struggled in that time. And then he was obviously locked down in the second quarter, and he actually struggled to find the ball, which is quite interesting because that might have been a really pivotal part in the game, because I think if Scott Pendlebury had continued on in that second quarter, that might have allowed the Pies a bit of a foothold to kind of get back into the game. You mentioned De Goey earlier, 12 disposals. We've seen some great football from Jordan De Goey so far, but it definitely wasn't his best game. And we see performances like last week where he kind of stands up and is, plays almost like a Dustin Martin, a match winner. And then you see performances like this. And I guess that's the frustration with Jordan De Goey, is that sometimes he's capable of, unbelievable football and other times he's not. So it'll be interesting to see, in terms of with his contract stuff. We might talk about that a bit later. Also, Chad Warner, he only had 22 disposals, but he led the game for meters gained. He had 644 meters gained. He's the quintessential 70-meter player. He gets the ball, he runs his 15, he kicks it 60, kicks it 55 meters. So there's some pretty good performances there. We mentioned De Goey, and some other of the Collingwood stars were shut down. Jamie Elliott being one of them.
Yeah, I mean, like last time in round 22, I think even Robbie Fox and Dane Rampy kind of switched on him. Obviously, they're probably a little bit taller and maybe have a bit more strength than Jamie Elliott, but what he really is usually good at is getting on the run and kind of beating his opponent, either on the ground or on the lead and hitting up the ball carrier. Tonight, this afternoon, he really struggled to kind of get off the leash. I know he kicked a couple of goals, but he just looked like he struggled. And I wish maybe Craig McRae kind of chucked him to the midfield. Throughout the year, he's kind of known to chuck Jamie Elliott through the midfield just to kind of give a bit of a spark. Obviously, he's quite hard at the footy. He's very quick. He's quite nifty. He's got a lot of agility about him. And just kind of break it up. Obviously, when they weren't winning earlier on in the piece, Callum Mills and Rowbottom and Warner of the like were really on top of the Pies midfield. I wish, McRae kind of allowed Jamie Elliott to, kind of get in there, kind of ruffle their feathers a little bit, throw a bit of body weight around, a bit of strength as well, and really kind of put Sydney on a bit of a confused state as to, hold on, how do we now adjust for Jamie Elliott? But yeah, Robbie Fox was excellent. Again, he's a very good shutdown defender for the Swans, and obviously Dane Rampy is the same. But yeah, unfortunately, for the Pies, he just couldn't get on the end of many.
I think you raised a good point there, because Jordan De Goey was struggling in the midfield. Jamie Elliott has moved into the midfield at great effect during times this year, and maybe even I'm not a coach, obviously, but maybe a swap between those two players. De Goey deep forward when he's getting tagged out of the game by Parker, and then, allied in the middle to try and give the team a bit of drive, particularly through the first 3 quarters when they weren't getting it. It could have been a move that could have possibly been used. We should talk about the Swans' defence. Brody Mychek, he had a decent impact late, but he was extremely well held by Paddy McCartan.
Yeah, I mean, the McCartan brothers have been the talk of the town this offseason. Obviously, Paddy's story is quite remarkable, suffering plenty of concussions at St Kilda, former number 1 pick in the 2014 national draft, obviously playing VFL in the Swans last year and got picked up as a supplemental pick over the 2022 preseason for the Swans. And he's just been a revelation. He's been an absolute brick down there alongside his brother Tom, who they both recently just signed at the Swans for a few more years. So, go Swans fans. But yeah, I mean, they just seem impenetrable. Brody Mychek, who's a battering ram. He's not necessarily the classiest he's just normally a workhorse, but the McCartans here, if they couldn't intercept the ball, they just constantly got a fist to it, bringing the ball to ground, either punching it toward out of bounds or getting it 10, 15 metres out of the contest. And yeah, they really are becoming the best duo defenders. I mean, obviously you've got Jake Lever and Stephen Ray probably have that mantle at the moment, but I think the McCartan brothers are definitely, if not almost level pegging with him, definitely shortly behind them.
If you had said that, maybe 3 or 4 years ago that Paddy McCartan and Tom McCartan would be one of the best defensive duos in the comp. I mean, Tom McCartan was a forward that was struggling to make a name for himself, and Paddy didn't look like he'd ever play AFL again. And then you look at the Swans, the back mix. Dane Rampy's been a great player, but what it's meant is that he's actually become the third banana in terms of tall defenders, and he's able to play a role. And then Robbie Fox. I mean, Robbie Fox is 185 centimeters tall, but he's had a magnificent impact during this back end of the season. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they go against the Geelong forward line, which we might talk about later as well. Moving on to the Swans' tall forwards, Buddy had a pretty strong impact on the game, and obviously Sam Reid did early, but it looks like Sam Reid suffered an injury.
Yeah, well, obviously subbed out of the game, and it kind of actually helped kind of Collingwood get back into the game. The tall forwards for the Swans were really troubling the Pies. Obviously, Darcy Moore, the premier all-Australian defender for Collingwood, was lining up on Sam Reid, which means either a Nathan Murphy or Braden Maynard or a Jeremy Howe would have to line up on Lance Franklin, which is a tall order for the best defenders in the league, let alone someone who you're probably given 5-10 centimetres height and a fair bit of strength that Howe was probably given to Lance Franklin. So unfortunately for Pies, in that instance, they just couldn't get on top, and obviously Buddy was able to punish the Pies, at times. He obviously got onto the end of a few and really was kind of a bit of a difference maker. He didn't have his blistering game where, he's kicked goals from 55 on the run. He's probably not going to do much of those, fancy highs he probably did a fair few years ago, but he's still competing very well, and he's still obviously hitting the scoreboard, that's his primary role. As long as he hits the scoreboard 2-3 goals a game, and either if he doesn't mark the ball, as long as he brings the ball to ground. Collingwood really rely on intercept marks, Jeremy Howe peeling off Braden Maynard, Isaac Quainer, obviously, and Darcy Moore, even Nathan Murphy, and they really just nullified that. The ability that Collingwood had to man up both Sam Reid and Lance Franklin and have to actually defend them as opposed to peeling off their direct opponents normally and then coming across and helping their teammates. It really made it tough for Collingwood, and that's probably what got the job done for Sydney.
I thought Buddy's best moment of the game was actually that contested mark he took in the dying stages when the ball was up on the wing, because Buddy's not really known for taking contested marks, and he's known for kicking amazing goals and marking the ball in the lead. And I thought that he competed really well. We all know that he, as you said, he can't do what he's done in previous years, but that was a really crucial moment in the game because it was all going against the Swans, and it just allowed them to steady and then obviously get the ball down the other end of the field. So and Sam Reid was actually brilliant. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. Let's say that Sam Reid can't play next week. Logan McDonald hasn't really played brilliant football in recent times. He's a young kid. He's going to be a great player, but he didn't have much of an impact throughout the game. They've got Joel Amate they can possibly bring in, or maybe they can bring in another small. So it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. Collingwood, where to for them now? What a season! Most people had Collingwood in the bottom 3, bottom 4. They started the season quite well against St Kilda and stuff, and then they kind of lost a few games, and it looked as if they were going to be better than last year, but still finish in the bottom 8 effectively. But what a season! How have you seen their season, and where to from now for them?
Well, I mean, you can only look at their season in awe. I mean, obviously, Craig McRae, brand new coach, having coached at Senior League, been part of the Hawthorn dynasty and the Richmond success over the last few years. So he had a bit of an inkling. Also, actually, a play at the Brisbane Lions in their three-peat back in the early 2000s. So he had an inkling of how success in football would come about. Obviously, came in and absolutely flipped the script. Changed everything Nathan Buckley kind of had, although Nathan Buckley created a very defensive mindset and outlook with Darcy Moore behind the ball and actually Braden Maynard, Isaac Quainer and the like. They kind of converted into attack, all-out attack, kind of free ball movement, erratic, just keep the ball alive, keep the ball going forward. And it was impressive. Obviously, they got on that 11-game winning streak, winning a bunch of games well and truly under a goal. It was just uber impressive. To make a prelim final from 17th, I mean, you have to tick the box as a success for 2022. I mean, no one obviously picked them to make finals, let alone make a prelim. But there's plenty to work with. As I said, they've got a great mix of youth and experience there. Obviously, Scott Pennant will probably go around for another year or two, maybe still sideline for another couple of years. Jordan De Goey, if they do keep him, he's kind of hitting his prime at that time. The Dacos boys obviously keep improving and both had stellar seasons. Obviously, Josh making the squad and Nick winning the Rising Star this year. Darcy Moore keeps coming into his own. And obviously, Bo McCreary really starting to kind of assert himself in that 22. There's sometimes, at times during the year, he kind of looked like he was kind of just sitting off the side and didn't really want to take over the game. And you saw tonight, how many times he took over the game and just 2, 3, 4 bounces, looked at his opponents, you know what, I've got you, I'll take you. Trent Bianco as well. Isaac Crane keeps getting better each week. So Pies fans, don't think it's all doom and gloom, although the scorecard tonight would suggest that. There's definitely plenty to work with 2023 and beyond. And I think they may actually be up there again about next year, but obviously we have to wait and see.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the team's at a pretty good stage at the moment to kind of springboard up there. Craig McRae seems like the complete package in terms of great coach, innovative coach. The players seem to love him. The media seems to love him as well. And obviously, the Collingwood seem to be close to be making quite a few additions to the team. Daniel McStay looks like he is probably coming to the club. Interesting selection because he doesn't seem to be a player that will kick, 40, 50 goals. I think the most he's kicked is maybe 30 or just under. And then also Braden Fiorini as a midfielder. The one that intrigues me, I think, is Billy Frampton because he played some absolutely brilliant football in defence this year. And I'm pretty sure the only reason why he didn't play the second half of the year was because he was leaving the club at the back end of the season. So Nix was playing Murray and Jordan Butts instead because they're going to be long-term. So I think adding Billy Frampton into that defensive mix, he's an intercept marking defender as well. It kind of does improve Collingwood. And it's hard to tell because we've seen teams in past years. I mean, the Western Bulldogs is a really good example. Everyone thought they'd kick on and be strong this year, and they only just made the final. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to Collingwood. Let's talk about the big one. First of all, the Swans are in there. Swans versus Geelong next Saturday afternoon. I don't reckon I would have picked this grand final at the start of the year.
No, not at all. I think obviously people kind of tipped Geelong to be on their way out or down. Obviously, they've got an aging list. I think on a Friday night against the Lions, they've actually fielded one of the oldest teams, 22 actually ever to be called in the VFL AFL history of 28 years and 130 odd days. So they've definitely, I guess, proved doubters wrong, so to speak. But I mean, when you look at their team, you've got stars on every line. I mean, obviously Tom Stewart starting in the back line. Even Sam DeConey's really coming to his own, although he's quite a young and handy player. Then you go to the midfield, you've got Selwood, who's still performing at a really high level. Obviously, Dangerfield's last night's game was just vintage Dangerfield, almost reminiscent of his 2016 Brownlow season. And obviously you go up forward, Tom Hawkins and Jeremy Cameron, all Australians again in 2022. So they just look almost the complete side. And then when you match it up with Sydney, another great, strong defensive outfit with plenty of attacking forwards up in that front half and inside 50. It's really going to be an epic battle. And honestly, I can't wait for next Saturday.
Geelong's last loss was on May 14. I was actually there over at Marvel against St Kilda. And I remember being at that game and thinking that, there's no chance Geelong are going to flag this year. But St Kilda steamrolled them in the second half. Geelong were pretty good in the first half. It was funny. In that game, I saw signs of Jeremy Cameron up around the ball and up in the midfield. I was like, why is Jeremy Cameron up the field? Why is he playing on the ball? What's going on here? Now we know because we've seen him, be, probably in the top 5 players in the comp from that point onwards and stuff. And Geelong are just in incredible form. How do you see the game playing out? We're probably seeing the two best team, along with Melbourne, probably the two best team systems in terms of organisation and defence and structure. How do you see the game playing out?
Honestly, it's going to be a thrilling contest. I think it's going to be a tight contest. I don't think it's going to be necessarily as free-flowing as this afternoon's game and last night's game. I think it's going to be a real arm wrestle and a real struggle. Both teams really honing on their defensive assets. Obviously, Geelong try force turnovers within the arcs and really try rebound quickly, which the Swans have actually perfected over the last 6 to 8 weeks. They really, if they do turn it over just say, in their front half, they have the ability to either guard the corridor and really force their opponents to either kick sideways, kick backwards, or go long down the line. So it's kind of really going to be almost a little cat and mouse type scenario where, ironically, the Cats are playing. But yeah, it'll be an interesting game to see. I think it's going to be the in my mind and what I'm thinking. I think it's the forwards who are going to make most of the opportunities, as we saw from the Swans' perspective. Lance Franklin in the first final, he couldn't get on the end, but Isaac Heaney and Papley and the like, they all got onto a few goals. Tonight's game, Franklin got onto a few, Reid got onto a few, which we don't even know if he's going to be available for the big dance yet. Papley got onto a few, so there was quite a spread of goal kickers. I feel like Geelong's defence is that well-oiled and quite strong in their ability to actually kind of defend the tall forwards of opposition sides, that it really is going to come into a Heaney or a Tom Papley or potentially a resting midfielder like a Luke Parker down there, or Callum Mills does go down there just to rest, to kind of throw a bit of a different mix up there. I think it's going to be up to maybe some of those players to break the game for the Swans. Whereas Geelong, I think it could be, players 16 to 22. Like Ryan Myers last night was excellent, 2 goals and 20-odd touches, and was really that link man, which no one really thought he could be. He's usually deployed as a kind of a crumbing small forward. But when you got Tyson Stengel, All-Australian, obviously this year, kind of slotting into that role, Guy Myers had to kind of reinvent himself, and he's got a bit higher up the ground, but kind of finds these pockets of space where he kind of pinpoints with his unique kicking style, as people kind of have noticed about Brian, to kind of find the kick from 650 to 60 to 7 meters out of Tom Hawkins, Jeremy Cameron leading up, and it really opens up the forward line, because then you've got Gary Ryan on the move. It's hard to beat one-on-one. Obviously, Tom Hawkins, one of the best full forwards in the competition, and obviously Jeremy Cameron, I think, is the best player in the game at the moment.
Just got a comment from Peter saying, wish you guys had the balls to mention the disgraceful umpiring. If you go back to the start, Peter, we chatted about it quite a bit, because it was actually probably one of the biggest parts of the game. So once the video's finished, to go to the start, we talked about it, and we agreed that it was probably the Pies were probably a bit stiff. Back to the grand final, I think it's going to be a war of attrition. Geelong, in terms of their structure, we're going to see the ball going over the boundary line. We're going to see ball ups. If I was a betting man, I'd be smashing the unders for total match score. If it's wet, we don't know yet what the weather's going to be. If it's wet, even more. It's going to be a true war of attrition, which doesn't mean it'll be a bad game, but it very well could come down to which forwards play better or which defenses play better. And it's going to be a magnificent game, and I'm looking forward to it a lot. Finally, who are you going to tip, and by how much?
Over past years, I feel like the team that kind of walks through a prelim final don't really have that contest that they kind of need to be hardened for a grand final. So with Geelong obviously winning and smashing the Lions on Friday night's preliminary final, they kind of really didn't have any contest from start to finish. So they didn't really get kind of that match hardness kind of when they have to actually really fight and scrap for the ball. Obviously, at the start of the game had to be won, and I think it was won, halfway through the second quarter, if not at half time. The Swans really, although they did stretch out to, I think, a 5 or 6 goal lead against the Pies, they really had to make sure they played to the last minute. As we saw, the Pies were coming in. I think it was a ball up 19 seconds there, in the forward 50 for Collingwood, and almost kind of scrapped the goal, and obviously ended up rushing through for a point. So I feel that the Swans, just because of the contest and what they're kind of now used to, I feel they might just pip the Cats and I think, honestly, it could be, the margins, I think, will be under 10 points either way, but I'm going to say the Swans.
Yeah, it's how tough is it to pick? I'm pretty sure the Swans are on a pretty decent winning streak as well. I can't remember how many games, but both teams haven't lost for so long. I'm not expecting to be blown away. Well, if you go Sydney, I'll lean toward Geelong. I think that Geelong's forward line is slightly more functional than the Swans. And this is really splitting hairs here. Obviously with Tom Hawkins and Jeremy Cameron, and then Tyson Stengel, there's 3 box office players there at the moment. But it can go anyway. I'll tip the Cats by 16 points. But I'll tell you what, boy, I'm looking forward to it. And we'll be back next Saturday after the game to chat about the game. And thank you very much for joining us on Out of Bounds.
See you guys.